Greetings, everyone. Pleased to join you again as we begin our study of the book of Joshua. We're going to start now on chapter 1. So if you have your Bibles with you, you definitely want to turn to your Old Testament and get yourself to Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1 as we begin reading. So I'll begin in Joshua chapter 1 verse 1. If you would follow along, I would invite you to, in whatever translation of your choice. And it begins and says, Now it came about after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, that the Lord spoke to Joshua the son of Nun, Moses' servant, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore arise, cross this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, to the sons of Israel. Every place on which the sole of your foot treads I have given it to you, just as I spoke to Moses. From the wilderness and this Lebanon, even as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. All the land of the Hittites, as far as the great sea toward the setting of the sun, will be your territory. No man will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I have been with Moses, I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous. Be careful to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, so that you may have success wherever you go. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way very prosperous, and then you will have success. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not tremble or be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. This is the opening words of the book of Joshua, of Moses speaking to Joshua, the new leader of Israel. The opening words really do set the tone. Moses, my servant, is dead in the very first verses. The Lord speaking to Joshua. Moses is now dead. Think of the impact this will have on the nation of Israel, has already had. You see, Moses is God's deliverer that was sent, the prophet, the one who led God's people out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, and in the wilderness for 40 years. This generation that has grown up in the wilderness, being the second generation, the first having perished, they know no other leader but Joshua. They know no other situation, if you will. They have no other concept of leadership. They have no reference for anything else. So Joshua is the man that is stepping into the shoes in a very real way, picking up the mantle of Moses. And what a large pair of shoes that is to fill. I mean, you look at Moses, look at his faith, you look at his love for God, you look at his leadership ability. Oh, he made mistakes, to be sure. But Moses really is a hero of the Old Testament that Joshua's going to have to replace, if you will. And so Joshua is put into a difficult position, to say the least. He's going to have to lead God's people, the people of Israel, the unruly nation that they are, a nation of slaves, having lived out in the desert, into a new home. He's going to have to settle them in the land of Canaan. But first, there's a whole host of enemy nations who are at war with them that they will have to defeat. And so God will tell this man Joshua, the new leader of Israel, his man, to be strong and courageous. And he doesn't just tell him one time. He tells him again and again in this first chapter to be strong and courageous. I hope you noticed them as we read together. If you have a pencil with you, you might mark and see how many times he did tell him to be strong and courageous. You'll probably find that he says it in verse 5, 6, 7, 9, and 18. There at the end. I believe it's another man that says it. But that's how many times Joshua's told to be strong and courageous in just this first chapter. I get the hint, and I hope you do too, that maybe he needs some encouragement. This is a mighty task that God has given him. And he has been equipped, to be sure. He has everything he needs. God says, I'll be with you wherever you go. I've given you the law. You have your instructions. I need you to be strong and courageous. That seems to be what Joshua needs most going forward. As we look back a little bit, step back just a little bit from the book of Joshua and look at it as a bigger picture, though, this book really is about the conquest of the land of Canaan, about God's people taking possession of the land God promised Abraham so many centuries before that he would give to him and to his descendants. But it's so much more than just a conquest. If you read it just at surface level and see the battles and the adventures and the divvying up of the land, you can think it's just about conquest, but there's, as with anything in the Bible, there's always more there. There's what's physically going on, then there's also what's spiritually going on as well. You see, here in this first chapter, in the first few verses here, Joshua's urged and commanded, saying, you read, you meditate on my word, on my law. You know that thing backward and forward. You see, Joshua is the military leader of Israel. But working hand in hand with the high priest as well, he is going to be the spiritual leader of Israel as well. We already know, if you're familiar with the wilderness wandering at all, if you're not, you'll find, if you read, that Israel struggles a lot, the nation as a whole, with staying what I would call spiritually focused. Man, one minute they're on the mountaintop and they got God's law, and man, everything is good and awesome and amazing. And man, 5 minutes later, they're worshiping idols and sacrificing to who knows what, or living in immorality. And it's like they can't stay focused spiritually, if you will. They can't stay disciplined almost. And so one of Joshua's main tasks in this book, maybe the main one, maybe even more than the conquest, is going to be keeping Israel spiritually focused in the right place. It really is a book about who will you serve. Will you serve God? Will you serve idols or yourself or whatever else? That's really going to be a theme. And that's one of the reasons God instructs Joshua so many times and so clearly and fervently. You meditate on my word. You know it. You don't depart from it from the right or the left. You don't let it go out of your mouth day and night, because you are the one who needs to be there to speak to my people and say, this is what we must do spiritually. Choose who you want to serve. And you can't tell people what to do if you don't know yourself. And that is why he must know God's words. A quick note on the words here, strong and courageous. They kind of have the meaning you would expect, with a slight connotation perhaps, but strong, having the ability to accomplish what is intended. It implies an element of resolve that is needed as well. So God wants Joshua to be strong. He doesn't want him to be a power lifter maybe, or the world's strongest man. He's talking about he needs to have the resolve to accomplish the mission God has given him. He needs to have the resolve and the ability, which God knows he does, but he needs to be firm in that. And courageous, of course, strengthened, powerful, resolute. The idea of being stems from a state of being strong, or the very act of strengthening. It's used often in commissioning formulas, being strong and courageous, or used in situations in which God leads his people militarily. There will be definitely be a context here. He needs to be resolved, and he needs to be courageous as well. Moses is a major subject in this first chapter. If you didn't notice, his name came up, I think, 11 times in 18 verses. Well, we haven't read the last verses, of course, yet. But so he is definitely a major subject in this first chapter, as well he should be. He's the previous leader for 40 years, delivered God's people from Egypt across the Red Sea and into the wilderness, and got the law, all those things. And now Joshua, in a way, is going to have to, maybe not reenact is the right word, but he's going to have his own moments, if you will, with the people of Israel, where he will become their deliverer. He will become Moses to the next generation, if you will. As they cross the Jordan, it's very much going to be their Red Sea experience. As they stand on Mount Ebal, Mount Gerizim, and hear the words of the law, that's going to be their Sinai experience, if you will. Choosing whom they're going to serve. Are they going to serve God, or are they going to serve themselves? The previous generation chose to serve a golden calf while Moses was receiving the law. This generation, we'll see how they choose when we get there. And so Moses will have a lot of those moments where he's going to have to be Moses, God's man, God's prophet, God's leader, his mouthpiece for the next generation. It's an exciting study, and I hope we learn a lot together with it. I hope you're excited as I am. As we close our study, we actually have about half the chapter to still read, and it's Moses now talking to the people. You see, God speaks to, I said Moses and I meant Joshua. God speaks to Joshua in the first part of this chapter. Then Joshua goes to the people, but you'll notice some of the themes remain the same. So I'm going to invite you to begin reading again in verse 10, and we'll finish the chapter together, and then we'll close. Verse 10 says, Then Joshua commanded the officers of the people, saying, Pass through the midst of the camp and command the people, saying, Prepare provisions for yourselves, for within 3 days you are to cross this Jordan, to go in to possess the land which the Lord your God is giving you to possess it. To the Reubenites and to the Gadites and to the half-tribe of Manasseh, Joshua said, Remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, The Lord your God gives you rest, and will give you this land. Your wives, your little ones, and your cattle shall remain in the land which Moses gave you beyond the Jordan. But you shall cross before your brothers in battle array, all your valiant warriors, and you shall help them, until the Lord gives your brothers rest, as he gives you. And they also possess the land, which the Lord your God is giving them. Then you shall return to your own land and possess that which Moses, the servant of the Lord, gave you beyond the Jordan toward the sunrise. They answered Joshua, saying, All that you have commanded us we will do, and wherever you send us we will go. Just as we obeyed Moses in all things, so will we obey you. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses, and anyone who rebels against your command and does not obey your words and all that you command him shall be put to death. Only be strong and courageous. So Joshua starts assuming command, and he starts giving instructions to prepare provisions because they're about to set out to cross the river. And very soon, the manna will cease. The manna being the bread God sends to feed his people as there's no food in the wilderness. But they're about to enter the promised land at harvest time, and there will be other sustenance. And so when they no longer need the manna, God will no longer send it. So they're going to have to prepare provisions for a 3-day journey. And then he starts speaking to the Reuben, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. If you're not familiar with the preceding history, don't worry about it. What has happened is 2.5 of these tribes have said, man, we're on this east side of the Jordan, and they had fought these 2 kings here and took some of their property when they were attacked by these kings. They said, man, we have a lot of cattle and herds and stuff, and man, this land is really good for grazing. Why don't you give us this land instead of giving us some of the promised land? And at first Moses is kind of upset by this, but then he sees that it's maybe not such a bad idea. And so he does, and he gives this land to Reuben and to the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh on the east side of the Jordan. And so they've already got some of their possessions and land. And so they did make a promise to say, hey, even though we've already got what we want, we've got our possessions, we've got our reward, if you will, they still need to help their brothers achieve their rest, to achieve their blessings that God has promised them, to conquer the land of Canaan and fight their enemies, just as they were helped by their brothers to achieve theirs. And so here Moses is reminding them of the promise they made and say, hey, are y'all ready? You got to come with us. And they say, oh yeah, we're definitely ready. We'll do whatever it is that you require. We'll follow you just like we followed Moses. And then they say, very interesting, just like God said to Moses, you only be strong and courageous so you can do what God wants you to do. And so Joshua receives encouragement from heaven and from earth, if you will, to be strong and courageous. He gets instructions and encouragement from the God of heaven and from those who he serves to be strong and courageous, to accomplish the mission God has given him. It will be a difficult mission. There's no sugarcoating it. But life is often difficult. Well, let's bring it to the present day before we close just a little bit, because all of us, rich, poor, young, old, no matter where we live or what time, there are challenges to face in this life. especially if you are going to be one of God's people, part of His kingdom. Jesus doesn't sugarcoat it either. He says there will be challenges. There will be trials. But how do we face those trials? How do we approach the challenges that life offers, that difficulties offer? God calls Joshua to be strong and courageous, to have the resolve and the commitment to do what it is that God has called him to do. Now, God calls us to do different things. He calls different people to do different things, to exercise different gifts, to be sure. But no matter what gift or challenge or task we've been given by God, He always calls us to be strong and courageous, to be committed to it, to be resolved in accomplishing it. And going along with that, He tells Moses, encourages him, and instructs him, saying, you know my words. You know my words in and out. You meditate on my words day and night, because they will give you the ability to find success. So if God gives us the mission, God gives us the resolve, and He gives us the instructions and the words and the wisdom to accomplish it. He says, all you need to do is tap into what I've given you and be committed. You be strong and courageous. You take hold of my mission, you take hold of my words, and you be committed and resolved, and you will find success in the task I give you. Now, we could say a note that success in God's world doesn't always look like success in the world's way of looking at things. But we could hit that another time probably. He says you will find the success, what I define as success, if you do step into my mission in the way in which I have instructed you. You be strong and courageous. I thank all of y'all for going along with me in this study. I hope it encourages you this week to be strong and courageous and step into whatever mission God has you in at this time, and to stay focused on His Word and to meditate on it and really let it sink in and let God's wisdom empower you to accomplish God's mission. I look forward to chapter 2 and the study as we begin there as well. I hope you're excited about it as well, and we'll come together next week. Blessings.